Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm going to summarize some of my notes on Unit 3 in Writing 2. Unit 3 in Writing 2 has two chapters, Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, and they actually have the same title, and Myth and Truth. In other words, how do you determine the authenticity, veracity, truthfulness of what you read? How do you determine if some information that you're reading is true and false? Chapter 5 is the bigger of the two chapters and gives a lot of preliminary information, and focuses also on when you do research with websites. How do you determine if the website is giving accurate information and not? And Chapter 6 continues the same topic. How do you determine the authenticity of a book? Okay, so as I stated, Chapter 5 has a lot of preliminary information as well. And for example, it starts by saying, relating the story of Eleanor Van Lew again. This was presented previously. This was Elizabeth Van Lew. This was a Civil War spy, and there are different accounts of her life. Some people say she was mad, some people say she was acting, etc. So how is it that there are such different accounts of the same event? Okay, so different accounts of the same events, same people, and etc. So how are so many differences occur in relating the story of people? Part of it is that there's great difficulty in determining facts in history, determining accuracy of information. Okay, determining the true and false nature of an event. And you might think the farther away you are from a particular event, let's say the event was over here, the farther away you are from it, the less information you have. That may or may not be true, because the farther away you are from an event, you might actually accrue more information about the event by different people who have done research on this. So you might actually better be able to judge an event the farther away you are from it. Also, these people who have accumulated information might be more neutral to the event than individuals who immediately followed the event and they had greater emotional interest vested in the particular event. So sometimes, however, the closer you are to an event, the more accurate it is. Nevertheless, historical events for people who were not even there tend to be very difficult to determine in their totality, their accuracy. So that's one problem, and that's one reason that accounts for why there are different narratives of potentially same event. The second is that authors bring a lot of baggage with them, so to speak, and that determines to a great extent how certain narratives are very different. One, for example, the perspective of the author might be different. Okay. For example, a Christian who writes a history of Islam will have a different perspective than a Muslim who writes a history of Islam. So this is going to change entirely the character of the work. So the perspective is different. Same thing with Native American history. Who writes it does make a difference. Okay. The second thing is, what's the motive of the author? Okay. Sometimes the motive might be as plain as money, because a certain type of books sell better than others. For example, one of the first biographies of George Washington written was apparently by a gentleman named Mason Weems. And Mason Weems, in his biography of Washington, writes the story of Washington chopping off the cherry tree, which is a famous story for Washington's childhood. He chopped up a cherry tree, apparently, and his dad was upset and asked who did this, and Washington said, "I cannot lie, I did it." So it's a cute story about how genuine, beautiful, and honest his character was, but apparently there's no foundation or any evidence for that story. but he knew that if people like to hear such stories about the heroes that they admire, so that might have been a reason why that occurred there, because it would sell better. So that money, believe it or not, it should be not surprising that sometimes people write stuff just because it sells their book better. Okay. The second is motives might be, sometimes the author's motives might be to discredit other individuals, or whatever they want to discredit, or to give credit to certain individuals, or exaggerate certain individuals' accomplishments. For example, somebody might write an exaggerated account of another human being to make them look like a hero, and somebody might write something that is to discredit another human being, if that's their political or whatever agenda. So the motives of the author are very important to consider. And besides these, there are other reasons why it is difficult, why there's different narrations of the same particular historical event. Then the author goes on to give an example. The example he gives is a very important one, and that is the myths that surround Columbus. Now, Columbus is very well known and equally well misunderstood individual. And a lot of people don't know a lot about Columbus, although they celebrate holiday in this regard. So many myths have therefore persist. So, for example, and then he talks about some of the myths that persist, whether or not he first was the first one to discover the Earth was round, which is not true. That's been known for a very long time. And another myth about Columbus is that he died poor. He died not famous as he was necessarily, but he did not die poor. He was quite rich when he died. So, nevertheless, and then the author cleverly leads this into a essay about Columbus Day. This is an interesting essay. Now, the essay says that we should celebrate Columbus Day, and Columbus Day should be celebrated. And it's written by a Italian American who also has connections with the American Indians. American Indians who were decimated by millions obviously don't like to necessarily celebrate Columbus Day, and which was the negation of their history from their point of view. But Columbus Day also is beloved by Italian Americans, apparently, because Columbus was from Genoa, which is present-day Italy. So they like to celebrate Columbus Day. So this person who wrote the essay says, well, Columbus Day is not like, it's not anti-American Indian. It's really what it is pro-Italian Americans. So that's kind of their take on the essay. So they want to celebrate. Then the question becomes, okay, how they give several reasons as to why they should celebrate Columbus Day and why people should not complain about it. It's a very interesting article. To me, the greatest flaw with this whole essay are its various logical fallacies that occur. The author could have practically basically done a better job writing it to make it more convincing. Nevertheless, the point of this exercise is, let's say if you wanted to counter this argument, or if you want to support this argument, how would you go research this? Is this true or is this false? How would you discredit or credit the information? How do you determine the authenticity of what they have written, which is the title which is the subject of this chapters? How do you determine all of this stuff is true and false? And if it's false, how do you prove it to be so? Okay, so it is important to be careful, readers, that you are not convinced by necessary false information. Now, somebody might say, all this is very true. That's fine. But the point here is, how do you go about figure out when something is true and false? Okay, so So then the question becomes, how do you know a certain historical event that's related is true or false? Okay, so something that's related, such as the example that's given is that ninjas, they wore black dress. Okay, ninjas wore black. Okay, that's a very famous impression that ninjas, when they would go about stealthily, these are Japanese warriors, special units, so to speak, they would stealthily go around at nighttime and doing their business, and they were superstar karate people of their time. So, but it persists that they were black. Is it true or false that they were black? So the author is curious. Did they wear black or did they not wear black? Okay, how do you determine if that has ever happened or not happened? So he gives an example of two sources. One source was from like how stuff works, okay? And the other source being another website, the Illuminated Lantern, Linja. Illuminated Lantern. Lantern is like, Khandil, light, and illuminated is brightened lantern. So, and this one says they wore black, okay, and this one says they did not wear black. So there's a conflicting information about a historical fact. How do you determine, is this person true or is this person true? One of them has to be false, right? Okay. All right. So these are both websites, okay? And these are both websites. Now this leads us to our topic, which is how do you determine whether or not a certain website is giving accurate information or not. So he basically gives 5 things to look for. Okay, the first thing is, and this I thought were actually very useful. The first thing is whose website is it? Okay, who's running the show? Now, whose website is this? Okay, so if there's a website promoting a certain thing, but you can't figure out who's actually running the website, that's kind of dubious. The information would be kind of doubtful, and you'd be very circumspect about the information that's given there. Okay, a reliable site should tell you who runs it. Okay, whose website, who runs it, who runs it. So a reliable website should tell us who actually runs the website. Sometimes credible people will not reveal their identity because they don't want to get phone calls in the middle of the night from crazy people. So it doesn't mean if the website does not tell you who runs it is that they're not credible, but it does help to know if they don't hide their identity, so to speak. This usually is like, there's a little icon somewhere over there that says about us, right? Okay, or their background, etc. Okay. The second is very important. Do they specialize? Okay, do they specialize in this particular topic? So any information about ninjas, for example, any information about ninjas would be more trustworthy if it came from a ninja website than it came, for example, from I don't know, astronauts in Space Federation organization or something like that, or the cooking channel for the West Indies or something like that. So, and they happen to have an article in ninjas or something. So a specialized, if they have certain specialty in particular topic, then they would have more authority in that topic. Okay, Wikipedia, for example, is not a specialty website. Okay, and I have read stuff in Wikipedia that I found very difficult to believe. So not everything's reliable. Okay, so however, if the website specializes in a particular topic, then it is more credible. It gives it more credibility. Okay, is there a certain bias that seems to be going on there? In other words, does it seem to push a certain agenda For example, if the author points out, it's difficult to not assume bias from a site that's about black, that ninjas wear black, if the site is selling black ninja costumes or something like that. So you always have to be watch out for bias, okay, some conflict of interest that might be occurring in the there, okay. And number 4, bias, okay. And then finally, who wrote it? Okay, who's the author? Now, it's the site would be more reliable if the author is an expert, okay. Now, here means specialized. Here meaning is the website exclusively dedicated to that topic. Here, when we say who wrote it is by an expert, meaning the person who wrote it has a certain specialty in the subject or not. Okay, and finally, it's very, very important here. Okay, finally, very, very important. Do they provide sources? Do they cite sources? Okay. Do they list this? Where did they get the information from, right? So a website that lists the sources, and you'll see many times you research things, and they get a lot of information, but there are no sources listed. If the source is listed, you can authenticate and go there and find out more about it. But if there are no sources listed, that's kind of like, it's not very good for the website's authenticity. So these are 5 things that the author suggested are useful in determining the authenticity of the information given at particular websites. And very similar things are going to be applied also to books. And these are, number 1, whose website it is, who's running it. Okay, is it a person, is it an organization, etc. If it's given and it's clearly stated that speaks well for the website. Does this website specialize in this topic? Number 3, is there apparent bias in there that could be causing some conflict and giving misinformation? Number 4, who wrote this particular article? Is this person an expert or not? Number 5, are the sources cited or not? What's the source of their information? Okay, where did the information come from? So these are 5 criteria that one can use to assess whether or not the information given is reasonably accurate. The chapter then asks the reader to do some investigation on their own on a particular topic, whether or not, for example, Bigfoot is real or not. So you're supposed to go research like 3 or 4 websites and go through this exercise so you can appreciate the veracity of the information provided by these websites. So that in essence is chapter 5. Okay, now chapter 6 is not much different. Okay, and it talks about the same thing but in regards to books. Okay, so I'm just going to make a little bit of room for myself over here. So chapter 6. So chapter 6, how do you use a book? Okay, now books in general, are more authentic because anybody can blog and write stuff on their website, but books tend to be more authentic in the information that they provide. But even then you have to be careful. Okay, and they tend to be more thorough, they tend to be more researched, they tend to be more well documented, and sources are better cited. Okay, so the first thing is, how do you go about finding the book that you're looking for? Okay, so you go to the library. Okay, so you don't physically have to go to the library. You can go to the library's website, and the website usually has access to the catalog. And in other words, you can search what's inside the library without actually going inside the library. But you do have to be careful that certain websites for the libraries will give you what's availability at different libraries that are linked to this particular library. So you have to make sure that you're looking for the particular location of the library. Right? If you're looking at Chicago Library, for example, you might have 12 or 200 libraries to look from. So you don't have to physically go there. Most libraries have a website and there's a link to the catalog, all the books that they carry, or the periodicals that they may carry. Okay, And so you go to the catalog, and then you search the book, and then you get a call number, right? From here you get a book's call number, which usually is basically a combination of alphabet and like A, S, and 3, 5 number alphabet and numbers, and then so you get the call number, okay? And then also on the website you can see if it's available or not. So you get very excited, you found the book you're looking for, but you go to the book and say, I'm sorry, it was checked out, it's not going to be back for another 2 weeks or something. Is it available? Okay, so if it's not available, they usually tell you when it's going to be available, and if in doubt, just call the librarian, who are usually nice people who help you out. So how do you find books? First place to find books is library, okay? And then this is how you go about finding the book. The other way to find books is actually online booksellers. And favorite among them is the Amazon, for example, and Barnes and Noble. And you go to the websites and you search the book that you want, and you can get them, or you can see if those books are available in the library. The thing about Amazon, for example, good is if you like a book, you can actually check out some of the pages, and if you really like the book, then you can go check it out from the library. So Amazon allows you to sample some of the stuff in there. Now, so you can do a search for books like this. You can search for the books of interest like this to see what books are available. Another way to look for books that you're looking for a particular topic. Let's say if you want to look for a book on history of Alaskan Native Americans, right? So you can go to the library and do a search on their card catalog, or you can do a search on the online booksellers, right? Or you can look at the references of biographies. So you can look at references. This is what I do many times. So let's say you found a website and you like the article, and at the end of the article there are a whole bunch of references in the bibliography. And those actually cite some very useful books. So a lot of times the stuff that I read actually came from references from other articles or from other books. So if you want to find some information, one very good way to do is actually look at the references that are made in other articles in websites and books, okay? And obviously you can do all of them at the same time. All right. So, then this chapter then requests the reader to actually find a book of interest that you're going to write an essay about, and they want you to search a book on Pocahontas, and from which you will glean some information, etc. Now, how do you assess a book's authenticity? Is the book a good book or not a good book, right? There are many things you can do, okay? First thing, who's the author? Okay, and most books have a slight biography, or says about the author, that gives you an idea of who actually wrote the book, okay? So most books have a little paragraph in the back side or the inside about the author, so you can determine. If there's sometimes they don't have it, then you can do a search on that. When you do a Google search or whatever, and find out about if the author is an expert, then the book becomes more reliable, right? Okay. Number two. If the author is not famous, on the other hand, doesn't make the book is not great, right? So you have to be careful. Now, the other thing is you also look for a bias, okay? You always try to see if there's a certain bias or something that the author is trying to sell. Even the books that have a bias, for example, a book about martial arts might give a wrong impression that for example, ninjas are the greatest people who ever lived, or something like that. But even if the book has a bias like that, it might still give you a lot of good information about the ninjas, right? So a bias towards certain thing doesn't mean the whole book is a waste of time. So you just have to be careful where the bias is, and have to be a thoughtful, careful reader. Okay. The other key thing is, does the book have footnotes and references? It's very important. If the book has footnotes and references, that immediately tells the author is cognizant, is careful about where they're getting the information, and this can be corroborated. And this gives the book a more value, and it gives it more credit. Okay, so footnotes and references are very important aspect of assessing a book's credibility. And fourthly, publication date. Now, sometimes you, depending on what you're searching, sometimes recent books are the ones that you'd be looking for. Now, you don't want to be reading about technological changes in the society and go back to like 30-year-old book or something, because society's changed so much. But on the other hand, if you want some other events, such as history, some of the best books in history have been written over 100 years ago, for example. So it really depends on how how publication date affects your impression of the book. Sometimes new is good, sometimes old is good. Okay. But you do want to restrict yourself to books that are reasonably not like 500 years old. It's kind of hard to, because times have changed so much. The idiom might have changed a lot. In other words, what they say might mean something quite different now than it did about that long ago. Okay. Now that's really it, and then the author here. That's really it about assessing a book. Now, let's say once you have a book, okay. Let's say you're looking for some about ninjas, okay. Once you found a book about ninjas, okay, and then you want to know about their dress, right? You don't have to read the whole book, right? How would you read the whole book, right? You don't have to necessarily, if you want to read the whole book, and if you want to get a big impression, that's good. But if you're looking for a specific piece of information, you don't have to read the whole book. You can go to the index, or you can go to the table of contents in the front, okay, and try to find the information that way, and then just read that part of the book. If you want a general impression, you might want to read the entire book. Okay, and that's really it in this chapter, and that's basically chapters 5 and chapter 6 in unit 3 of this book. Until next time, then, assalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. Assalamu alaikum.